could be end-of-year holiday distortions. I'm David Brancaccio. You're listening to the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.
This is David McGowan, CEO of WJCT Public Media, here to say quick thank you to all of you who responded to our ask of support during our recent on-air pledge drive. It takes all of us to make this radio station happen. Thank you.
The Florida Theater presents Judy Collins, an American singer-songwriter and musician with a career spanning 7 decades. In concert Monday, January 6th, 8 p.m. Tickets and information are available at floridatheater.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, the untold truth about Black women's health. We talked to TV anchor Keitha Nelson about her new half-hour special on the roots and realities of healthcare disparities. Then, a hiking spree challenge, 7 trails in 7 creeks. We'll tell you how you can get moving in the new year. And more than 6 decades of music and protest. We sit down with folk icon Judy Collins ahead of her Jacksonville performance. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media.
News in Washington on Corva Coleman. Authorities continue to investigate the man believed to have killed 15 people and wounded dozens more yesterday in New Orleans. Shamsuddin Jabbar drove his truck into pedestrians celebrating New Year's Eve. He apparently fired at officers, wounding 2 of them before he was shot and killed. Authorities say an ISIS flag was attached to the truck. Meanwhile, information is also coming out about the victims. 25-year-old Matthew Tenedoria was on Bourbon Street when he was apparently hit by the truck. His mother, Kathy, says his friends had searched for him.
They met up with each other. They kept trying to call Matthew, and then they walked to where Matthew's car was parked in an outdoor lot on Rampart Street, and his car was still there, so they knew, he must be somewhere.
She says Matthew Tenedoria worked at the Superdome in New Orleans. That's where college football's Sugar Bowl was supposed to be held yesterday. That game has been postponed until this afternoon. Meanwhile, police in Las Vegas say they're investigating any possible connections between the New Orleans attack and yesterday's explosion of a Tesla Cybertruck in front of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. The driver was killed and 7 bystanders got minor injuries. NPR's Frank Langfitt reports.
The 2 events have some things in common. They both involved trucks and occurred in tourist towns on New Year's Day. And both vehicles were obtained using the same car rental app, Turo. However, police in Las Vegas say they're still investigating whether the explosion, which killed the driver, is an act of terror. And they point out that, unlike in New Orleans, the Cybertruck did not have an ISIS flag. If police determine the explosion was a terror attack, they suggested an obvious question will be whether the figurative targets were Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, and President-elect Trump, whose name adorns the hotel. Frank Langfitt, NPR News.
Police in South Korea have raided the offices of the airline and the airport at the center of Sunday's plane crash that killed 179 people. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul the first crash victims have now been laid to rest.
Police raided the Muon International Airport, the offices of low-cost carrier Jeju Air, and other sites. Police had a search warrant issued on charges of professional negligence resulting in death. Attention is focused on a concrete barrier housing landing navigation equipment, which the Jeju Air flight collided with after overshooting the runway. Authorities have launched a nationwide inspection of all aviation safety equipment near airport runways. Identification of all 179 victims' remains was completed Wednesday, and so far at least 24 have been returned to their families. 2 flight attendants were the only ones to survive the worst aviation disaster ever on Korean soil. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And you're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The Jacksonville Housing Authority is close to hiring a new chief executive after dealing with turnover at the top of the organization for more than a year. The Housing Authority Board agreed on Monday to offer a 3-year contract to George Guy, who's currently the head of a much smaller housing authority in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The job will pay $310,000 a year. Guy will also get an extra $25,000 for relocation expenses. Board members say they plan to set clear expectations this time around. Former CEO Dwayne Alexander resigned amid controversy a year ago after an investigation revealed mismanagement of funds. And turmoil at the agency only worsened when the Housing Authority's former chief financial officer was arrested and charged with theft for allegedly spending agency funds on himself. This year marks the much-anticipated return of Miami's Three Kings Day Parade after COVID forced a hiatus in 2021. The parade is set for Sunday, January 12th along Southwest 8th Street in Little Havana. It celebrates the popular Hispanic holiday that commemorates the three wise men's visit to the baby Jesus in the biblical Christmas story. It's a chilly start to the day here in Northeast Florida, and this afternoon it will remain cool. Highs will be in the upper 50s to lower 60s with sunny skies. Overnight, lows will dip down into the 30s, so it'll be a cold start to your Friday. Highs tomorrow afternoon reach the low to mid 60s with sunny skies.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, saving the lives of Black women with cancer. We discuss a new study that aims to counter centuries of medical abuse and neglect. Later in the program, exploring wild North Jacksonville and a conversation with folk icon Judy Collins. But first, Black women have the shortest survival rate and highest death rates of any other group in the United States when it comes to most cancers. To discuss the roots and realities of this troubling healthcare disparity, we are joined by First Coast News anchor Keitha Nelson. Good morning, Keitha.
Hey, Ann.
We're also joined by Dr. Kelli Tice, Chief Health Equity Officer and Vice President of Medical Affairs at Florida Blue. Good morning, Dr. Tice.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Keitha, the statistics are stark. As you've reported, Black women are dying of cancer more than anyone else in this country. But you approach this story not just about the statistics, but about the stories. Tell us a little bit about some of the people that you met.
You know well, that's what it's all about. It's the people. And that's what kept me going through all of this. I started out by reading about the study underway by the American Cancer Society. So what they're aiming to do is do a research study involving 100,000 Black women across 20 states, including Florida and Georgia. Over 30 years, they plan on studying these women to find out exactly why it is that Black women in particular are dying of this at this disproportionate rate of cancers compared to all other races and ethnicities. And when I read that, I was kind of like, what is going on exactly? So I ended up all the way in Atlanta speaking with the lead researchers of this study. And the more we spoke and things came in the open, I was just mind blown. For one, there's conversations that we have amongst each other, in small groups, such as people would say things jokingly like they're trying to kill us. But when you hear things such as hair care products or different lotions, things that are marketed towards Black women, possibly being connected with cancer and being connected with our health issues, it's kind of like, red flag, hello. And so that's what this research study is aiming to do, is to look deeper into these things that we've spoken about for generations, to figure out, is this true? Is this in fact leading to our demise? And throughout this study, because, we started back in October of last year, we're still going strong, still going to do more of these series. But throughout this, I found out that it's way more than just, products that's leading to this. There's also disparities within healthcare. That is a huge one. And I'm so glad Dr. Tice is here today to really shed some light on that, because the more I spoke to her and others, I was just mind blown.
Yeah. And one of the people that you met in this the series of stories that you did and then ultimately the special that you put together is Von Seal Bradford. She's from West Jacksonville. She's a very young cancer patient. Tell us a little bit about what she encountered when she first noticed something amiss with her breast.
Von Seal's story is way too familiar when you speak to Black women in particular, is that she said, I was trying to get someone to listen to me, but no one was listening. Now, she was rather young, in her early 20s, when she found the lump in her breast. And that, too, sometimes has a lot to do with it because of restrictions or regulations. People assume that because of your age, you likely do not have breast cancer. But the more, and you'll find out in this series, if you get a chance to watch it, you'll see that it's really all about breaking down those barriers, speaking up for yourself. You know something is wrong, even though the medical professionals are telling you, no, it's likely not that. It's just, this. She advocated for herself again and again. She even recalled a time when she was in the not in the hospital, but in a medical examining room, and she's telling them something is wrong, and they're dismissing her. And she got furious, irate. They say the term angry Black woman. She became that angry Black woman. But that's what it took to save her life. And again, her story is way too familiar. I've heard it time and time again. Jessica Florence, another one. Jessica, though, unfortunately ended up losing her life. But again, more of this is to come within the series if you look at it. But it's just way too familiar, these stories that you hear about people saying we are not being heard, our stories.
This, Dr. Tice, is not unique, as Keitha says, and the need for women to advocate for themselves, particularly Black women, when it comes to issues like this, is not to be underestimated. But tell us a little bit about the statistical side of this story when it comes to the disparity that is seen among Black women in different kinds of cancers.
So, I appreciate the opportunity to highlight this, right? We can't get to solution without understanding the data. Like what really is the problem, right? And I think that the thing that is the most stark statistic for me is that the breast cancer isn't more common in Black women, right? We talked about the things that can increase the risk of developing breast cancer, some things that are marketed to Black women. But breast cancer is actually not more common in Black women, but Black women are 41% more likely to die from it. That is the end of the story as far as I'm concerned, because what that means is that there are multiple things that are going on that are causing Black women to not have the same opportunity to have a successful outcome. And that's what has to be addressed. It is probably the worst example of how disparities show up in disease. Now, other cancers across the board, lung cancer, colon cancer, all of the most common types of cancer have higher death rates for people of color and in particular Black women of color. Some of it is driven by the fact that we have clinical barriers that exist, right? So screening guidelines are set up based on norms, averages, for example.
Explain just what is a clinical barrier as opposed to something you just encountered in a doctor's office.
So, for instance, your insurance will only pay for screening tests if you're of a certain age or are deemed to be at higher risk. And a lot of those risk factors come about, they're familial. For instance, if a cancer runs in your family or if you're of a certain age or a certain ethnic background. People of color, Black women in particular, have been historically underrepresented in all of those studies, right? And so if you're not in the data set from which the actual guidelines are created, then there's no opportunity for you to then have the guidelines shaped toward you.
Gotcha. And so if you are presenting as a Black woman and there aren't a lot of people in a study that was used to develop, for instance, whether Medicaid pays for early screening or breast cancer detection, it's less likely that you'll be able to obtain that service.
Exactly. So, and most payers, Medicaid and commercial payers, actually use a standard set of guidelines to build their to frame their programs in terms of what they will pay for. And there is an organization called the United States Preventive Services Task Force, where we as physicians are sort of trained to look. And what that organization does is look at the evidence across the board and make recommendations based on a lot of data. So, that's how we get cancer screening age sort of guidelines established. So, certainly by the age 45, you need to have had, at least a baseline mammogram, whether it's recommended annually or every other year based on your history. All of that comes from the USPSTF, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. And so all of the sort of decision makers look to that particular organization to sort of set their standards. But again, the question we don't ask ourselves is, what is the representation that is utilized to determine those guidelines that we're all pointing to? And the problem is, when there is a change and when there is an impact to an underrepresented group, guidelines like that are pretty slow to change. Prostate cancer is a great example of that, right? It is more prevalent in African American men, and the screening needs to begin at a younger age for Black men than for others. But it took a number of years before the guidelines sort of changed. And I think studies like this one, the Voices study, will begin to shed light on some of the things that may increase risk, and perhaps as a result, we hope, influence the guidelines that then will cause insurance companies and others to align in terms of ensuring access to the appropriate screening at the appropriate time.
And to bring that to a human example, this woman that Keitha interviewed, Von Seal, I mean, she had a noticeable lump in her breast. She had a discharge, which, I think in an older woman would be an instant red flag. But her age, and also the fact that she was receiving, I think it was
Medicaid at the time. She wasn't
eligible.
Some of us have insurance that would cover those type of things. Not all of them do, or they cover them at different extents. And she believes she was treated differently because of that, because of the type of insurance that she has. And again, her age. And if you speak with Von Seal, she'll tell you her race had a lot to do with it as well.
And so what does it mean, Dr. Tice, when you are getting a late diagnosis in terms of successful outcomes of any kind of cancer treatment?
Well, I think it's really important that we talk about the risk that is that younger women face when having a diagnosis of breast cancer. Those cancers, by definition, actually tend to be more aggressive. Mm-hmm. And I think that in Von Seal's case, for instance, the fact that it took so long for her to have the first diagnostic test is of great concern. Anyone involved in the care, no matter the payer, Medicaid or any other insurance, the clinical response to the symptoms that she described would have been a simple imaging study. Perhaps we're not doing a mammogram first, but an ultrasound could have been done very early on to determine whether you were talking about a solid mass, which is much more worrisome for cancer, or something that's cystic or fluid filled, which is more common. And then you sort of go from there. But in my opinion, it becomes very difficult to reassure based on your lived experience as a clinician, your assumptions based on the patient's age or presentation, without the basic diagnostic test that says worrisome, not worrisome. So I think that was a big miss.
This is, as you said, this is not just breast cancer. This is cancers of all kind. And I think that one thing that has become more apparent in recent years is this is not something that is confined to people of a lower socioeconomic status or who might be marginalized in other ways because of education or life experience. That this is something that women of all professional levels and incomes experience in a similar fashion. Physicians have written about it. And I wonder, I mean, has your own experience been, has it reflected that in your own professional life?
So that's a very important question. And I think that's what we have to deal with, right? Much of what we see in health disparities. So in disparities, what it means is we see a higher burden of illness or disease or poor outcomes in certain groups in comparison to others. Disparities are driven not by genetic differences, right? Disparities are driven by, the things you described, access and those sorts of things, but also very strongly influenced by bias. And in the cases that we've discussed thus far, we know that was actually at play. That perception that women of color in particular have, that their complaints are being dismissed, that their reports of pain are being ignored. Mm-hmm. 2017, there was a study that came out that actually indicated that residents in training still believed the idea that pain was actually perceived differently based on race. They thought Black folks actually experienced pain at a lower rate than others. 2017.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm talking about
And these are
physicians
the
in
future doctors of America at that
correct,
time.
correct. And so the bias shows up and it influences how, how you are treated. It also can be really discouraging to have your symptoms dismissed and make it difficult for you to advocate for yourself. And I wanted to circle back to that because I think that's really important. You opened with, the value of advocacy, self-advocacy. But in groups that have been routinely sort of disenfranchised, ignored, not had access, not been treated well when they have had access, advocacy can be very difficult. And, I started my career working in a federally qualified health center, and I had patient after patient who would say to me, "Hey, can you space out my visits a bit? Because it's really hard. The lady at the front desk is they're so rude to me." Or, I just, when you send me to see the specialist, like, can you call them beforehand? Because the last time I went, they didn't listen to me at all. Those sorts of things. That shouldn't be, right? But that's bias. That's the clinical staff perhaps being sensitive to a lower reimbursement rate that they may get with certain insurances, right? It may be that they have developed a bias because folks without access tend to be late to appointments. They tend to miss appointments or have to reschedule them at the last minute because they have transportation challenges or don't have the copay or all of those things, right? And so it is our responsibility to contribute to the building of a health system that opens its doors widely to everyone and creates the same level of comfort that you would suspect I would have as I seek care as others.
But do you feel like you experience health care that is different from what you're describing your patients experience, or do you experience something similar?
It is similar in a lot of ways. It's probably similar in too many ways. I think, once we are placed in the gown that ties in the back, right? The 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 feeling of sort of privilege that comes with education or executive status or that sort of thing goes right out of the window. And certainly, yeah, I've had 4 children, and all the care that I've had related to those deliveries, I did experience, that same feeling of having to sort of really advocate for myself because I was clear that I wasn't being seen by those that were delivering the care, and I think that's the difference that we can't discount as we talk about self-advocacy.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to First Coast News anchor Keitha Nelson and Dr. Kelli Tice about racial disparities impacting the health of Black women. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org, or you can reach out on social media. In terms of the experience that women have, we actually did a segment in May on disparities in healthcare. And we talked actually to one of our colleagues, Henny Smith, Keitha, talking about her experience when she went to the clinic as a teenager. And she described overhearing the doctor outside her room saying, she can just wait. She's a morbid, obese Black woman. She can just wait. And this is what she had to say about how that experience impacted her.
I was very hesitant in going to the doctor and I will say, in all fairness, it's still kind of that way to this day. I have to be in a lot of pain to go, and I know that it came from that experience. I can tell you what I had on that day. Like, that day is so vivid to me because it hurt, and it just stuck to me because I could not believe that a trained medical professional said those words out of his mouth about a patient and said it loud enough for me to hear it.
Yeah. Keitha, I said Henny Smith. I meant Henny Stewart, of course. But this kind of experience, it is still painful for her. Yeah. And it's really extraordinary to hear how it attaches to even the healthcare that she seeks today, saying that she has to be in a lot of pain before she'll go.
Yeah. Hearing Henny, hearing Dr. Tice, it made me think back to a conversation I had with one of the lead researchers of the Voices study, Lauren McCullough, about systemic racism, racism within the healthcare system itself, because she herself, a very accomplished researcher, scientist, she has, I don't know how many degrees at this point, she herself said while having her second child, she experienced racism, and that too made her feel like, if I'm experiencing this, I who am, clearly have the right insurance, right? Have the funds needed to get the medical care that everyone deserves. If I'm being treated like this, how are our sisters that are not in this position, not of this educational level or background, how are they being treated? So hearing what Henny said, no surprise. No surprise there. It's the sad truth. And that is why this study, Voices of Black Women, voices.cancer.org. I can't say that enough. That is why this study is so important. It's so important that you log on to voices.cancer.org to see if you are eligible to be a part of this study, because you heard Dr. Tice say it. If we are not a part of these research studies, we won't find out what is leading to these disproportionate amount of death rates that we're seeing amongst Black women in particular. We have to find out. We have to be a part of the solution. Enough complaining, let's be a part of the solution.
We've got a call from Stanley on the north side. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Happy New Year's, everyone. I run the African American Economic Recovery think tank, and one of our pillars is preventive health. Every time I talk to African Americans, especially in leadership, they're not concerned about preventive health. And my concern here, when it comes to the health care, the health care products, when did that change take place? I'm talking about the time period between the hair care products and natural hair. Thank you.
So that's a good question. I mean, the FDA has actually, recommended that the products in some hair relaxers are, not be sold anymore, that they're that much of a hazard. And yet those products continue to be sold. That ban recommended by FDA has not been implemented.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I did reach out to the FDA for this study. So the ban was supposed to be implemented in April of last year, and the response I received was I'm laughing because it's ridiculous. They're saying that it's difficult. It takes time to put these bans in place. If you have people losing their lives, if we're not sure if this is leading to death, maybe we should just, hold off a little bit, do some more research, and then possibly make it available later on. But the fact that it appears that they're being lax about this, it hurts a little bit, because then you wonder, if this was affecting a different group of people, would that ban have been put in place? Would there have been more emphasis put on this? Would it be more important? It just brings up these questions.
I mean,
It's not known.
there was a study this year by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and they actually were very stark in their findings. Dr. Tice said the U.S. healthcare system is, quote, by its design, delivering different outcomes for different populations. By its design, saying that there's been, in the past 2 decades, almost no progress in eliminating racial disparities in healthcare, even though there's been promises to make that change. And they found that many times the well-being of Black people are, quote, at the mercy of powerful business and political interests, which I would imagine removing products from the market would fall into that category of something that is difficult because it's going to cost money and run afoul of people's, financial interests.
Absolutely. And, it's unfortunate that we're even here having to have such a discussion. But, this 20 years ago, the unequal treatment, was published, and it actually talked about what you just described, right, and set these goals for the healthcare system to begin to work on health disparities. And 20 years later, many of us who, I was had really just begun my career at that point. 20 years later, finding that there had been significant improvement is of concern. But here's the key. The system produces what it is designed to produce. And we created a sick care system that was really designed to function on the payment for services delivered to folks who were sick. And so, to the caller's point, there was not any significant investment in preventive health, right? And in order to do that, you have to think outside of your screening. It has to do with your environment. What do you have access? Do you have access to the things that are required to be healthy? Do you have information that helps you to understand? Absent an FDA ban, do you have an understanding of what is in the things that are being applied to your body, the hair chemicals and other products that are in use? There is a disparity of information delivery to populations that are underserved that actually perpetuate this, just like there is a disparity in the delivery of nutritious food and clean air and all of the things, right? And so it's so complicated that I think as we have leaned in to try to solve this, because we have done so in a piecemeal fashion, we may make progress in one area, like access. There are a lot of chief health equity officers that now exist across the country and, in various areas of healthcare and in medicine. But we haven't made a great deal of progress in creating healthy environments in which folks live. We haven't made great progress in the delivery of actionable information to the folks who need to use it to apply to their lives. And we talked briefly about bias and racism. And when I heard the soundbite from Honey, obesity itself is a source of extreme bias that exists in the healthcare system, and it is very common for folks who have obesity to be dismissed, have their symptoms not worked up at all, because it can all be attributed to their weight. And so if you add Black, female, obese into the mix, then the likelihood that your symptoms would not be well addressed is it becomes much more likely. And then it impacts, of course, her behaviors, right? It's such a complicated thing that our conversation today and the Voices study and I think the level of awareness that we're hoping to create with these conversations really should drive change across the healthcare continuum.
The study, Keitha, is a longitudinal study. It's women who don't have cancer, right? Who are, I think, under 55.
25 to 55 is, I believe, the range that they're looking for.
But this is going to go for 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
So
but when you think about that, 100,000 Black women, 20 states, 30 years. When you think about the information they'll be able to gather, finally, some solid info, some solid research that can be applied to all of these issues we're seeing across the board when it comes to healthcare. That makes you a little excited and hopeful for the future generation.
Well, I want to ask you about that because you're urging participation, and yet there is this terrible history of, Black women in the system being abused, exploited, even as you've reported, the father of gynecology.
Marion Sims, yeah.
Abused terribly.
Yeah.
With female Black patients that were enslaved.
We had a chance to sit down with the professor at Flagler College, Michael Butler, who went into the deep, dark history of the abuse of Black women's bodies. And obviously this goes all the way back to enslavement. And with Marion Sims in particular, he spoke about one case that really kind of stuck with me, a 13-year-old woman, a child, who he tried to lease her from the person who owned her. And because of the level of the abuse that was going to be done to her body, the owner said, "No, I'm not going to lease her to you." So he instead paid for her. He purchased that 13-year-old woman, and for we don't know how many years did experiments on her.
Without anesthesia.
Without anesthesia. And it wasn't just her. So many women, and it's documented. And this it's a painful history, but it needs to be discussed so that we understand why we are where we are today. Because this also leads to what Dr. Tice mentioned earlier back in 2017, you not knowing why it was that we believe that Black women experience a different level of pain. This goes all the way back to enslavement. That's the mindset, is that we can handle it. These are children that were experimented on that experience this pain. And so the bias continues. How many decades later, generations later, is still believe that we are able to handle pain better than others. And it's false.
And there is also, Dr. Tice, we were talking before the program about the legacy of Henrietta Lacks, who, went in for a cancer treatment and instead, had her cells harvested for experimentation. Certainly the Tuskegee experiment, another case in which men were not treated for existing disease. So what do you tell people when you're encouraging them to participate in something like the Voices study? to say, now is the time to be, a part of this study. What's changed?
Can I just say this really quickly? Let's make it clear. This Voices of Black Women study is a research study. Everyone out there who were telling to go to voices.cancer.org, this is not a clinical trial.
Meaning
it's a
there's
research
no
study where they're not drawing blood.
Observational. It's
Yeah, observational. This is
They
they're
don't
not
have to
drawing
take any
blood.
medicine?
No, I'm a part of it myself. I'm speaking firsthand. I signed up for it. Dr. Tice did as well. They're asking you a series of questions over the next 30 years. That's it.
Okay.
You can save lives by simply answering questions. This is not a clinical study.
But still, there is that faith that needs to be established or
Mhm.
restored.
Oh, absolutely. I sit at a lot of tables where we talk about health equity and the work that needs to happen across the country. And one of the things that we've said more than once is that the industry has earned the mistrust
Mm.
of minorities in this country, and so we have to earn the trust again. And in doing so, I think we have to do the things that I described. We have to communicate openly and appropriately about the expectations. We have to be clearer about what the value is of participating in things like this. And while it is an observational study, there is an opportunity, if you consent, to have blood drawn, to have certain markers sort of evaluated and that sort of thing. And I in fact got my box. I might be older than you, Keitha. Maybe that's why I qualified for that. Just saying. But I got my box in the mail, a couple of weeks ago, and now have to schedule time to go and have my labs drawn. And it gives you pause as you think about that. And I wanted to be certain that we declare that, right? That it may be uncomfortable at all of the stages, when you fill out the lengthy application, when you now then are asked perhaps to go and submit a sample of blood. But we have to remember the investment and, the things that clinicians who are trusted in the community and leaders like you, Keitha, who are shedding light on these stories. I think the thing we have to be able to do is say, here's why I'm participating. Right. And as when I was in patient care, that's how I talk to my patients' parents and about their own care. If it were my loved one, here's what my approach would be. This is my opportunity. I wasn't at the table before, but I'm at the table now, and I have this opportunity to contribute to the legacy of knowledge that exists for people who look like me. And yes, it's a little disconcerting that, I've got to go to the lab and have this blood drawn, but I see it as an investment because there are folks who didn't get to be at this table.
Yeah. And I just want to kind of return to the people, Keitha, because we talked about Von Seal. She told you that she was in a text chat group with two other women who were diagnosed with cancer. And the chat group was called The Sisters That Will Survive. One of them was Jessica Florence, who had an 8-year battle with cancer. The other woman, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Both of them died.
Both of them died. And Von Seal is still here. I remember asking her that question, and her pause kind of like sucked the air out of the room because I was afraid to hear the response. She was the only one who made it. When it comes to Jessica Florence, her story kind of kept me going throughout this entire thing. She had passed away when we started doing the story, but she documented her entire journey on social media, and I felt like I got to know her because I went through so many different videos and reels from her. But Jessica, something she said time and time again within these videos is that no one is listening to me. That's what this woman said. She knew something was wrong. She continued to advocate for herself, to speak to the different doctors, but she felt as if no one was listening. And when she was finally heard, it was too late.
Well, it is not too late for people to participate in this study. Keitha, just one more time, tell us how people can get involved.
Voices.cancer.org. Simply go to the site and see if you are eligible to be a part of this research study. Some, as you just heard there, you may be asked to draw blood, but you don't have to do that. Some parts are just simply research. That's what I'm involved in. You're just asking a series of questions throughout the next 30 years. Again, even if you can't save yourself, you are going to save possibly the lives of future generations of Black women. And that alone should drive us all to this site to try to help out however we can. Because it's not just about blaming the system and others. What are you going to do? How are you going to be involved in this fight to save the lives future generations of Black women.
Well, Keitha Nelson's special is called The Untold Truth. We have a link to the full entire half-hour special on our website. Dr. Kelli Tice, Keitha Nelson, thank you so much for being on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Up next, 7 trails in 7 creeks. We'll tell you how you can just to get outside or get moving. The 7 Creeks Winter Hiking Spree Challenge is a chance to tackle both. Joining me to share the details is Fred Richards, the new executive director for the Timucuan Parks Foundation. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined on the phone by Emily Palmer. She is a park ranger with the National Park Service. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
So I would like to start, if I could, Fred, you are new to this role, but you have a long background in both the nonprofit world and the world of connecting people to nature. So what are you looking forward to in this job, and how does your background kind of inform what you're going to be doing?
Well, this is really an exciting opportunity for me. Being new to Jacksonville and being able to explore these wonderful park systems that we have here has just been really enlightening to me about what kind of jewel that we have here. 80,000 acres of parkland, 25 plus parks. And this all really started in 1999, as well as the journey of our own organization. We started in 1999, celebrating our 25th year this year. But it started with Mayor John Delaney and the Preservation Project in Jacksonville. We went through a period of acquisition, which was basically acquiring the properties and the lands and making sure that we were preserving those. And then in 2010, we started the activation mode, which is really bringing people to the parks. Our mission is basically preserving, promoting, and enhancing Jacksonville's natural areas through community education, engagement, and enjoyment. So right now, we're really promoting the engagement and enjoyment aspect of these parks, and that's what we're doing for the next, hopefully, decades to come.
I kind of remember even before Mayor Delaney, obviously his park preservation project was a huge part of expanding the footprint of parkland. But even before that, Congressman Charlie Bennett, who kind of was an advocate for the whole Timucuan area before it had any, designation for preservation. But yeah, the goal has now been shifting to getting people to explore these places because there is such an enormous amount of land to explore. So
yes,
for people who haven't been to the 7 Creeks area, just briefly describe.
Great. Well, the 7 Creeks area is comprised of, there's basically 7 parks out there. We have the Betz-Tiger Point Preserve, the Bogey Creek Preserve, Cedar Point Preserve, and then Cedar Point, which is the National Park Service, Pumpkin Hill Creek Preserve State Park, the Jim Wingate Preserve, and the Pescatello Island, only accessible by kayak.
Oh.
But through our partnerships, we have partnerships with the Florida State Parks, the National Park Service, and the North Florida Land Trust, as well as the City of Jacksonville. So together through this partnership, we're promoting areas like this for engagement and enjoyment.
Yeah.
So the 7 Creeks Winter Hiking Spree is actually taking place from January 1st through March 31st. And all that you have to do to get involved in this is basically go to our website and you download a access tracking. It's basically a tracking log. And on that tracking log, it's self-reported. So you can verify that you've been at these trails. You send the information back to us. You can download the tracking form if you go to our timucuanparks.org and go to the news and events page, and then you drop down to the 7 Creeks Hiking Spree. You'll see all the information there about this event. So it's just a great opportunity. There's 5,600 acres of connected land out there. There's 30 miles of trails, and there's opportunities for everybody. There's opportunities for hiking, horseback riding, kayaking, canoeing, fishing. There's numerous scenic overlooks and overviews, and there's a lot of bird watching as well. So, in fact, if you were to go to Cedar Point, the National Park Service area, there's over 200 species of birds that you might be able to see. And you might even catch the painted bunting, the elusive painted bunting.
Yeah, which some would like to be our state bird. Emily, I want to ask you, because you've been a park ranger with the National Park Service since 2009. For people who haven't been to this area, what do you tell them about its draw, its appeal, and why they should visit?
I really love that so many different entities are working together in the 7 Creeks area because it creates vast swaths of uninterrupted parklands. And, animals don't really care if it's a City of Jacksonville park or if it's a national park, but having that uninterrupted experience for them just means that we have this little enclave in the ever-growing City of Jacksonville that's going to be natural, that's going to be a great spot, like he said, for birding. But it's also an amazing spot for history, because out at our property at Cedar Point, we have Spanish missions. We have archaeological digs happening oftentimes in the summer with UNF partnerships. And we have the ruins of a early plantation out in the of the Blue Trail. So there's a lot of history as well. We also offer ranger guided tours if you check out our calendar of Cedar Point. So for one of your hikes in the hiking spree, you can join a ranger guided tour and learn a little bit more about the history of the site.
Emily, this you mentioned, the ever-growing city of Jacksonville, and this area itself is increasingly kind of hemmed in by development. Is how does that impact the work that you do? The fact that there is so much growth in that area around the Seven Creeks recreation area?
Well, in some ways, it's actually helpful because parks are for the people. I mean, we want to preserve this area for all the benefits that nature gives us. And one of those benefits is time in nature, spent relaxing, spent communing, knowing why these places are important. And having a lot of neighborhood communities around means that we become their neighborhood park. We become the spot where they go to walk their dogs. We become the spot where they go with their kids to burn off that energy. And we want to be that service. But as there's more and more people, there's more and more pressure on our parks. So the fact that we have as much land preserved before the development comes in as possible is really going to help give everyone that connection to nature. So we were happy. I think we got in at the right moment to get as much of that land preserved. And we're still in the works on a few other properties, trying to make sure that these wildlife corridors are maintained and not cutting off animals, so that we can keep that flow and keep that range for a lot of our species. So it's still a work in progress, but we don't see development as entirely bad. We want people to think of this as their neighborhood park and have that ownership, because when you feel an ownership over a park, you become a better steward for it.
Fred, just in terms of the tips that you all have for people coming out, I mean, there's sort of the usual stuff: keep your dog leashed and wear weather appropriate clothing. But one thing I thought was really interesting was photographing the maps on the kiosks before hiking, which I'd never thought of, but it seems like it could be really helpful.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, if you don't have access to the map, but I wanted to also let you know that you can. The map is accessible on our website also. If you want to get the map to Seven Creeks, if you basically go to our visit page, you'll see a drop down for the Seven Creek.
And we'll have a
winter
link to
spree.
that on our website.
It'll be that'll give you everything you need. But that's a great suggestion. Also, the most important thing is don't leave anything there. Whatever you bring in, take it out. Pack in, pack out. I think that's an important aspect. Keep the place clean. We have a lot of volunteers. In fact, last year we had over 840 volunteers that actually were stewards of the wilderness parks that helped us clean those parks. And we brought over 800, nearly 900 individuals from underrepresented communities to enjoy those parks, bringing them there to fish for the very first time. There's a lot of youth that live here that have been here their whole life, and they've never gone to one of our parks. They never experienced that benefit
Or
that
had
nature can provide.
sometimes access to waterways altogether.
Exactly. So we're doing a lot of things with the youth education, but this winter spree is part of our Healthy Living series. So we're really trying to get people out there and bring them to the parks, and we're hoping to do more of that in the future.
Well, we thank you so much for being here. Fred Richards, Emily Palmer, thanks for telling us about the Hiking Spree Challenge.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, a recent conversation with folk icon Judy Collins.
In 2025, the legend returns to the big screen at WJCT Studios. Join us for Elvis's 90th birthday celebration with a special screening of Elvis, That's the Way It Is. Doors open at 6:30, film begins at 7. January 15th, 2025 at WJCT Studios. Visit wjct.org/events for tickets.
On the next Fresh Air, we conclude our Holiday Week series collecting some of the 2024 interviews we particularly enjoyed with Selena Gomez, one of the stars of the series Only Murders in the Building and a star of the film Emilia Perez, and Alex Van Halen, who's written a memoir about his late younger brother Eddie and their band Van Halen. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
It's 2025 and time to check in with On Point's Money Ladies.
I think 2025 is the year of uncertainty. There's not this big ray of hope. There's a lot of worry still.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Michelle Singletary and Rana Foroohar join us to talk through the macro and micro of the American economy in a new year and under a new presidential administration. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Has your job become too demanding or less fulfilling?
I'm gonna need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow. So if you could be here around 9, that would be great. Okay?
Next time on 1A, we're listening back to our conversation with author Bridget Schulte about why U.S. work culture is such a grind and what we can do about it.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. 6 decades of music and protest, and she shows no signs of slowing down. We are pleased to welcome folk singer and songwriter Judy Collins by phone. Judy, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. So you perform this Monday, January 6th at the Florida Theater here in Jacksonville. What can people expect when they see you here?
Singing some of my songs. I have a new album called Spellbound, and I'll be singing a song, Girl from Colorado, which seems to be hitting the charts and being played from the cloud all over. And then, of course, the classics like Both Sides Now, Someday Soon, and a couple of the songs that are famous from the 60s. I love singing Where Have All the Flowers Gone nowadays. It kind of brings up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. And I think that I'll be able to have a good time and sing some of the classics as well. You know, my dad was in the radio business for 30 years. He had a wonderful radio show, and he used to tell Mae West jokes and also sing things like I'll Be Seeing You. And lately I've been singing Danny Boy, and everybody joins me, and everybody seems to know these old classic songs. So I combine everything from Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie to Judy Collins and Bob Dylan and Bing Crosby.
Wow. You know, your songs, I mean, the ones you're perhaps best known for include Both Sides Now and Send in the Clowns. And you are, you know, you continue to perform them, but as you say, you are still making music. So what do you take inspiration from? What makes you want to write a new song these days?
Well, I'll tell you what inspires me: sitting down, turning off the telephone, shutting the door, and focusing for a couple of hours on the piano, which is where I write my songs. I have a friend who's a mystery writer, actually, and he says that being creative is like laying pipe. You have to go out and do it, whatever the weather, whatever's going on. I just put on my big fuzzy sheepskin coat. Bloody cold in New York right now. I don't know what the temperature is in Florida, but I hope it's much warmer than it is here. I'll be glad to get down there and shed my sheepskin coat. But I must say that, you know, trying to write songs sitting down and doing it is always inspiring, but it's also very frustrating. But I've done it for so long that I take that for granted. I started writing songs in 1966 because I was introduced to Leonard Cohen, who came to play me his songs so that I could record them. And I recorded Suzanne, and I sometimes sing that in concerts. It still is the most powerful song, and everybody seems to know the lyrics to it. I was the person that started out his career, but he started out my career as a songwriter because he said to me, I don't know why you're not writing your own songs. So I ran home and wrote a song called Since You've Asked, and I still play it once in a while.
It's amazing that that sort of relationship that you had with him, how you each brought each other's careers to the fore, and it's really an extraordinary partnership. But so many people have learned from and been inspired by your music. I think of a 2008 tribute album that included voices including Joan Baez, of course Leonard Cohen, Dolly Parton, and Rufus Wainwright. So just a wide range of people, of styles and of ages of music that, are driven by the sound that you made famous.
Well, I was lucky to get that album together. It's called, what is it called? I forget. Born to the Breed. And I did have a good time with that, recording those songs with all those singers that I adore. And of course, the music business has changed so dramatically, and it's all about glitz and glamour and glory and big time, huge productions. And sometimes you miss the song itself. It gets lost in the drama and the costumes and the frivolity. But every once in a while, you pluck out a wonderful song that has been written and performed. And I've followed, of course, a number of artists who I think whose writing is up to par. I think I love Sean Colvin. I love Ari Hest. He's a great writer. I've written an album with him that was nominated for a Grammy. So there's always somebody around that's doing something that's beautiful and memorable and exciting. And I think that's important that level of songwriting continues.
Well, Judy Collins, she's performing at the Florida Theater on Monday, January 6th. There are tickets at floridatheater.com. Judy Collins, thank you so much for your time and all of your music.
You are so welcome. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. You as well. Well, that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have questions or comments, you can send.
Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
On January 10th and 11th, Robert Spano conducts the Marcus Roberts Trio and the Jacksonville Symphony for Gershwin's Concerto in F, Tchaikovsky's Fifth, and more. Visit jacksymphony.org.
Star V Learning Center. Whether you are interested in sharpening your Microsoft desktop application skills or need to learn the latest technical software, online or in-person classes available. Info at starv.tech or 564-9500.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR.